is Kwanchanok, or you can call me Jenny, and today I'm with.
New Shanaporn Toswanvanish. I'm a senior at UCLA right now studying geography and minors in geographic information system and technologies and urban and regional studies. So today I want to share you a little bit about my path in geography and also my future career in urban planning.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about the misconception of geography, because the first time that I was talking to her, I just learned about these interesting fact about geography, that there's some stereotypical things going on about geography. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, so a lot of people in geography, when they think of geography as a high schooler, they would think of a discipline that you need to memorize a lot of maps. It's only about maps. You need to remember all the landmarks, know all the flags, which actually a lot of people still ask me right now. When I told them that I'm geography major, they would be like, oh, so you must be able to remember all the capitals or flags, and
yeah.
It's actually not true. Geography is not that. Actually, geography is about the writing of the road. So then basically we learn about everything on the spaces. It's the study about the space, you learn about the nature, the climate, the environment, but also learn about the physical human stuff, the city, population, economics, politics. It's about everything, and you can see everything interconnected in a really fascinating way. So that's how I got into geography.
And I heard that also about geography, you also said about sociology, right?
Yeah, I think it has a little bit of every discipline. So geography is such a broad discipline. You'll study about everything, even though you study economics, there's economic geography. Or if you study poli-sci, for example, there's political geography that can explain a lot of things that happen on the space. So I think it's really cool how geography can be a part of many disciplines, and it's really fundamental of how we creating this society in this world.
Mm-hmm. So basically, geography can help shape the cities.
Yeah.
So one of the things that really interests me in geography is the urban planning.
Okay, yeah, me too.
So, many people don't usually go into that path, especially girls. So I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to go into urban planning?
That's a great question. So I want to start off as I grew up in Bangkok, Thailand. So I lived in the city in my whole life, and I right now live in Los Angeles. So I see a lot of city forms and also a lot of different challenges, but also different potentials of how to make it better. I've visited a lot of field work, in Thailand. I visited more than 50 sites to collect the data and learn about the communities, and here I also went out to the field as I wrote my thesis, and I just feel there's so much more to learn about the city, and there are so much potentials to make the city better. And that's how I decided I want to pursue urban planning and be the one who actually be the educator, but also be the policy maker to actually work with the communities and make things better.
That's really interesting point of view.
Thank you.
When you say that there's so much potential, can you emphasize a little bit on that?
Yeah, so a lot of people, when they go to, for example, in LA, a lot of people would say don't go to Skid Row. Skid Row is just a lot of unhoused people sleeping there, it's unsafe. But I actually walked there by myself. It's actually not unsafe. There's a lot of misconceptions about those kind of places. Just because you think it's looking bad, it's not necessarily bad, and people just don't entirely understand how the places are constructed and what are the underlying kind of structural challenges in that space. And Skid Row is not necessarily bad, but there are people who struggling with their life. They need to live there because they can't afford their homes. The home in Los Angeles are too high of the price, they cannot afford that, so that's why they became unhoused. There are a lot of structural challenges embedded in there. So I think you need to look more in depth, and after you understand everything, you will see the lights in those challenges. You see we can make it better, and that's something I really want to be that person. Yeah.
So having like this stereotypical like perspective of a places, does that also affect like tourism? When you help with urban planning and when people have like a better perspective of it, it kind of does help like engaging people into the cities.
Yeah, I mean, like urban planning is like really intertwined with like a lot of stuff, including like economic opportunities, like the job opportunities, including tourism. So how to actually make the place looks like desirable for the tourists, that's one way. But also there's another challenge, if like there are a lot of tourists like who came into the city, who came into the area, it can totally change how the residents like perceive them, and also like sometimes tourists are not like good tourists, sometimes they bring a lot of like problems too. So there are a lot of places who also struggling with like losing their identity because like they cater toward tourists more. So I think that's something that we need to like grapple on, of how like to make sure that the community is still like the same as like the community, and they can preserve the identity and have the economic opportunities of having tourists.
So how can we be a good tourist? As a tourist myself.
That's interesting. Actually, I feel like when you are the tourist, you're not just like visiting there, like snap like your pictures and then you go away,
Stories.
I think it's better to actually understand the space, understand the place, understand the people there. So understand the history, understand like the story in the community. I think that's one good way to actually learn about the space and be respectful about the place, like also be considerate. Like you should be a considerate person when you go anywhere, like see what other people do and like kind of follow them if you don't know how things work, and something like that. So, and of course be more environmental friendly when you go there, like with the trash and cleanliness. That's something you should be more considerate on when you visit places.
So in summary, you should like do a research before you travel anywhere.
Yeah, I think a little bit of research helps. Like it doesn't hurt anyone,
So I know that since you talk about urban planning, but many people don't know what it is. So I want you to give us just a broad summary of what urban planning is.
Yeah, so for me, urban planning is study about the city. Like to learn about how the city forms, how the urban designs like started, and also how it shapes people's life, and how can we make it better through like policy, like learn about the politics in the urban spaces. The city, urban planning is such a broad like discipline also, there's like the theory side, there's also like the practical side. But when we talk about the master of urban planning or like the urban planning kind of like discipline, it would be more like tangible, like practical. You need to like work with like the design, or sometimes like you work with the policy. But if you do urban geography, for example, that I've been doing, it's also like more like theoretical, and you think critically about the spaces and how it's formed and how it's like racialized, for example. And yeah, so there are a lot of like things that you can juggle on, but I think urban planning is such an interdisciplinary like program. You need a lot of knowledge, not only from like the city planning, urban design kind of thing, but also like you need civil engineering to know. I'm actually like taking class on civil engineering right now. It's about transportation equity, and those like engineers not only designing the transportation systems which are in the city, but they also think critically how to make the transportation accessibility more like equitable, more like widespread to the people, and people can access and increase like their life opportunities. So engineers, like urban design, architecture, they also like design the landscapes, like those are the people who do that, not the urban planner itself. I feel like urban planner like doing more like larger scale, and architecture does like more smaller scale of the planning. So those are a lot of things, like geography, like politics also comes in place for sure. Economists also like they make the city like flourish the city. So there are a lot of things that comes into like urban planning, and I think it's really fascinating.
So out of everything like economics, politics, like which part do you think is the most important for urban planning?
I actually can't pinpoint one important aspect actually, because everyone actually works together to create a city, you know, like the city is not gonna be a city without like everyone, like without people and without everyone. Like you can't have one person and to call the society, you know, like the city is some kind of like society of like people coming together and help collaborating to make a city. So I actually can't pinpoint like what are the most important aspects. Yeah, that's a really hard question.
So urban planning isn't just about planning the cities, but it's about like engineer, economics, politics, like all of them combined
Everything.
together.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, how important is it for urban planning for a city? Does
The
every
people-
single city need urban planning?
Yeah, of course. I think every city needs urban planning, you know, but sometimes it's a little too late, like, you know, Bangkok. We thought about urban planning a little too late after everything already happened. One challenging thing is like it's kind of hard to undo what you have done already. You already invested in infrastructure, for example, like in LA, you invested like in highways, in like freeways, you know. There are a lot of freeways everywhere. So I think it's a little harder to undo what you have invested in infrastructure that like permanent, you know. So that is one challenge. But I think every city needs urban planning. A lot of challenge like happening like your home. Housing market is like a one big discipline in urban planning, and this is something I'm interested into. You know, there are a lot of stuff like that integrated into your daily life, and that's one part that actually made me interested in urban planning, because it's just so much affecting your life, but a lot of people don't notice that, you know. The fact that you have the park and the fact that your community might not have enough park for people, also one interesting point of like you like why is it that there are a lot of stuff that people are overlooked, and I think urban planning try to address those problems.
When you talk about house marketing, can you explain a little bit what house market is?
Yeah, I mean housing, you know, like we operating in like the capitalist city, like capitalist society. So we have the property and that's your house, and then your house is like in the broader scope of like the housing market that they like sell and they like obtain and they like own, for example. And those housing market are really fundamental for the economy of the city. Like for example, I did my independent research on Beverly Hills and how the housing lot size is important to how they shape the public spaces they have, for example. And housing is just really fundamental of how people accumulate the capital, how people accumulate their wealth, and also how people perceive spaces and how people like interact with people, with other people, or interact with their community space. So yeah, that's one way to think about housing market. But also like a lot of people struggling to like obtain housing, you know, like if the rent are too high, people cannot afford the housing. That leads to a lot of like unhoused populations in, for example, in LA, or you know, like a lot of like Bangkok, there are a lot of like urban rural migrations. Like you came in from rural area but you can't afford the rents in the city, but you still need to work, need a job, and you need to live close to your job because you need the proximity so you can walk to work, because you don't have like mobility to like actually get a car and like drive to work. So then like housing is something like is fundamental right. Like I feel like everyone should have access to housing. They make the informal settlements, you know, like many people would call them slums, but I wouldn't call them that. I would say it's informal settlements, and those people are someone who can't afford to like have like a nice like standardized housing. And yeah, so that's how they live their life. And housing can be different like across the countries, you know, like housing policies are something really small right now, I feel, but really important to everyone's life, because everyone need to have somewhere to stay sheltered.
It's about having like this basic right?
Yeah, it is a basic right.
And you're talking about, like, it's so fun to hear you talk about Beverly Hills, because like when we look at Beverly Hills, we think of like, oh, this like fancy housing. Do you think that Beverly Hills like become like a really populated city because of urban planning?
it's actually not that populated if we look into like the city itself. Like
Oh, it's not that.
it is not that populated. Like because they are wealthy homeowners, and the city actually created the regulations to require the homeowners to have the large like parcel size for their home, like unnecessarily large. Like if you want this big of the house, you need to have like this big of the space.
Oh.
So then like city of Beverly Hills is already like small. It is small because of other things, but I'm not getting into that. But it is small. And then because one person, when they have the house, they need this big of the parcel size. So then like when you divide up the space, it actually really not high of the density because people obtain a lot of parcel size. So that's one thing that can skew the politics, like the homeowners like powers in the city or whatsoever. So yeah.